This happened in 2015. A call came in one evening from the hospital. A body needed transporting to a village in the mountains, and the family was offering 20,000 taka if it could be delivered that same night. No one would ride along in the back with the body. The son would follow separately on his motorbike. The driver agreed, and by 8 p.m. the body was loaded into the ambulance, wrapped in a white shroud on the stretcher. About 2 hours into the drive, deep into the mountain roads, the temperature inside the ambulance suddenly started climbing, despite both windows being open and the vehicle being only a few months old. The driver pulled over at a roadside diner that was just about to close, grabbed a quick cup of tea while the engine cooled, and figured the heat had simply been mechanical. Back at the ambulance, the cabin felt cool again, but glancing toward the back through the small window, he saw the entire rear was filled with thick fog, obscuring the body completely. He climbed out and opened the rear doors. The fog cleared within seconds. What he saw made his blood run cold. The body, which had been lying flat, was now sitting upright on the stretcher, still fully wrapped head to toe in the white shroud. Then it began pulling the cloth from its own face. A woman's voice came from beneath it. "Where are you taking me?" "Why am I wrapped in a burial shroud? I'm alive. Let me go." Confused and terrified in equal measure, the driver hesitated, but her face, once uncovered, looked completely alive and healthy, her expression full of genuine confusion. She said she'd been undergoing treatment at the hospital and had no idea what was happening to her. She asked for water. He fetched a bottle, and she drank half of it in one go before setting it back down. He called her son, who was still on his way, and explained everything, that his mother was alive, drinking water, sitting up and talking. The son was stunned and insisted it wasn't possible. His mother was certainly dead. They argued briefly before the son agreed to hurry over. When the driver checked back on the woman moments later, she was lying flat again, shroud pulled back over her from head to toe, exactly as before. When the son finally arrived and the driver opened the doors to show him, the woman lay motionless. The driver called out to her repeatedly. Nothing. He climbed in for a closer look and pulled back the cloth from her face. This time, he screamed. Her face was completely crushed, unrecognizable, as if she'd been in a horrific accident, no distinguishable features left at all. The son, furious, accused the driver of being drunk or insane. How could a dead woman possibly have been alive minutes ago? But then, the driver pointed to the water bottle sitting exactly where the woman had left it, and it was completely full again, despite her having drunk half of it right in front of him. Neither of them could explain it. The son then revealed the truth. His mother had attempted suicide by jumping in front of a truck, and it had run over her face. She'd been declared dead just 10 minutes after being admitted to the ICU. Hearing this, the driver felt a chill run through his entire body. He tried to back out of the job entirely, but the grieving son begged him to finish the delivery, offering even more money. Reluctantly, the driver agreed, on the condition that the son ride with him the rest of the way, refusing to be alone with the body again. They loaded the son's motorbike into the back beside his mother and drove the remaining distance together, the driver glancing nervously into the rear-view mirror the entire way, terrified the body might sit up again. They made it to the village without further incident, delivered the body, and the driver was paid immediately. He never worked as an ambulance driver again, switching to long-haul trucking instead. This happened to a family living in restricted embassy housing abroad. One night, after a minor argument with the rest of the family, an older brother, then in 10th grade, stormed off to sleep alone in the study room. The room had a heavy sliding glass door, old and stiff, the kind that screeched loudly whenever it was opened or closed, because the tracks had worn down over the years. He slid the door shut, lay down, and began drifting off. Just as he reached that hazy edge of sleep, he heard it, the door sliding open, slowly, deliberately. The same grinding screech, but stretched out unnaturally, nothing like the quick, forceful pull it usually took to move it. He froze completely, too terrified to open his eyes, sensing something standing just beyond the doorway, with clear, unsettling intent. After several long seconds, the sound stopped. Gathering his courage, he opened his eyes. The door was open nearly a foot, but the room beyond was completely empty, unnervingly still. He turned back toward the wall and closed his eyes again. That's when something yanked the pillow out from under him and struck him with it. He didn't hesitate. He bolted from the bed and ran straight to his sister's room, screaming. He said nothing to the rest of the family that night, but by the next morning, everyone knew. Their father's only response was firm. No one goes into that room alone again, day or night, always in pairs. This wasn't an isolated incident. Throughout the building, home to expatriate embassy staff, residents occasionally heard the sound of a young girl crying, sometimes from outside the bathrooms, sometimes echoing from the floor above. Everyone in the building sensed something about the property's history, but no one wanted to discuss it openly, given how sensitive the subject was for their country's reputation abroad. It later came out that the land near the building had once been used as an open cremation ground. A second, far darker incident had occurred in that same building years earlier. A staff driver lived there with his wife, their son, and his young daughter from a previous marriage, around 10 or 11 years old. She was frequently mistreated by her stepmother, made to do all the housework, constantly berated. One day, sent to wash clothes in the bathroom while starving, she began crying from hunger. Her stepmother, irritated beyond patience, struck her in the head with something hard. The blow killed her instantly. Because of the international sensitivity involved, the family was quietly repatriated, and whatever legal consequences followed were never disclosed. But after the child's death, strange occurrences began in that same bathroom. Residents reported hearing a small girl's voice, trembling, repeating, "I'm hungry, Mama, I'm hungry." The crying continued for years, only fading in intensity after a religious ceremony was eventually held in the girl's memory, though it never stopped entirely. This happened to a man's father back in 1988 when he was in 7th grade. His school sat 5 miles from home, and he normally took the bus. One evening, he lost track of time watching a movie at a friend's shop and didn't leave until nearly 10 p.m., arriving at the bus station to find it completely empty, everyone already gone. With no other option, he decided to walk home alone. Partway down the road, someone called his name from the darkness, a man from a neighboring village, who said he'd missed his ride and was relieved to have company for the walk. They set off together, the man leading, the boy following a short distance behind, though no matter how much he tried to catch up, the gap between them never closed. About a mile in, they reached a fork in the road. Their path home lay to the left. The right led toward open farmland. Without a word, the man turned right. The boy called after him repeatedly, but got no response, and when he looked again, the man had vanished entirely. Fear crept in immediately. He lit a cigarette to steady his nerves and kept walking, passing a group of fishermen working the roadside, which calmed him briefly. About half a mile further, approaching a small bridge, he saw something that stopped him cold. An enormous bull-like creature, far larger than any normal cow, its horns pressed against the underside of the bridge itself. He stood frozen until it slowly descended and disappeared beneath the road. Shaken, he pressed on and soon ran into a teacher and one of his students stepping outside near the bridge. Surprised to see him out so late, they walked him partway to a nearby shop, where a family friend, a local shopkeeper, let him rest and fed him. The shopkeeper told him to sleep until dawn prayers, promising to wake him in half an hour. Not long after, the boy heard violent kicking against the shop's outer door, along with muttering he couldn't make out. Assuming it was nothing, he ignored it, until the kicking returned, louder. Stepping outside, he found the shopkeeper standing there, wide awake, and asked why he'd been kicking the door. The shopkeeper simply said, "Turn around." Behind them stood two towering, monstrous figures, human in shape but covered in thick fur, dressed in white robes. As the boy watched in horror, the two creatures lifted the entire shop structure off the ground and hurled it into the nearby river. Both men froze in terror, silently praying, until the call to dawn prayer rang out from a nearby mosque, and the creatures dissolved into the air, leaving behind only an eerie voice saying, "You got lucky this time." He never walked home late again. A respected government officer lived on the top floor of a 5-story building his own father had built, tending a lush rooftop garden of fruit trees and vegetables where he spent most of his free time. At 61, he was diagnosed with advanced lung cancer. As his condition worsened, he called in a lawyer to finalize his will, dividing his assets among his children and leaving one specific instruction. He wished to be buried in the same family plot as his own father, directly above him. He died during the 6th day of Ramadan. Shortly after dawn prayers, his family gathered around him. After the burial rites were completed at the family cemetery, the gravedigger, while preparing the plot, broke through into the layer below and uncovered old bones, the remains of the man's father and grandfather, buried in the same spot generations earlier. The remains were carefully gathered, reburied to the side, and the new grave was completed above them. On the drive back to the city that night, the family's convoy of vehicles was repeatedly blocked by fallen trees across the road, not once, but at every alternate route they tried, forcing them to turn back each time. This happened again days later, and again weeks after that, on every single trip back to the village to visit the grave. About 3 weeks after the funeral, the youngest son, a medical graduate studying for further exams, began hearing a woman's low, mournful crying from the rooftop directly above his room, well past 1 a.m. The rooftop access was always locked after 10 p.m., with no possible way for anyone to be up there. Investigating, he found the door still locked, yet the crying continued. The next night, he went up anyway. Near the fruit trees his father had planted, he found what looked exactly like his father, kneeling and crying in a distinctly feminine posture. When the figure lifted its head and looked at him, it simply stepped backward off the roof's edge, vanishing without a sound, no impact, nothing. Family members dismissed it as grief-driven hallucination, until it happened again, this time with the figure walking the length of the roof before disappearing mid-air. Then came the smell of his father's favorite meal, roti and beef, drifting through the apartment at 3 a.m., followed by the sight of his father seated at the dining table in the dark, illuminated only by the open refrigerator door, meat and liquid pooling out onto the floor in impossible quantities for food that had been fine hours earlier. A local imam who was called in admitted he could sense something wrong but lacked the ability to resolve it, referring them to someone more experienced. Eventually, a senior spiritual teacher, well into his 90s, arrived and asked pointed questions about the father's final years, noting he'd sensed unusual activity in the household that felt deliberate, not random. The youngest son then shared a recurring nightmare, his father's corpse in the grave, pierced through by a tree trunk crawling with snakes, his face grotesquely swollen, insects pouring from his eyes. The elder listened and explained. Decades earlier, someone had stolen burial cloth from the grandfather's original grave to use in a black magic curse, targeting an unrelated third party. The residual effect had lingered in that gravesite for years, quietly affecting the father throughout his final years. His increasingly erratic solitary behavior on the roof, they now realized, hadn't simply been age or illness. The family returned to the grave, dug carefully around the newly disturbed area, and found a small, discolored fragment of burial cloth buried separately nearby, the remnant of the original theft. It was handed over and ritually burned. The disturbances faded gradually over roughly 6 months, and after the entire property was reconsecrated, nothing further happened. The youngest son, having missed an important exam during the ordeal, retook it successfully the following year. A young couple moved into a newly purchased flat in a fairly secluded building after the husband took a new banking job in town. The building itself was small, only the second and third floors finished, with upper floors still under construction, left mid-build because the owner lived abroad. The unusually low price should have been the first warning sign. Living mostly alone during the day with her toddler, while her husband worked long hours, the wife began noticing strange behavior in her son. He'd play as if with an invisible companion, tossing a ball to someone who wasn't there, insisting a boy in a cap was playing with him. On the balcony, in the dining room, at all hours, he kept referring to this same invisible playmate. She brushed it off as ordinary childhood imagination, even when he tried climbing onto the dining table to pour water for his invisible friend. One Friday, while the husband was away at an office outing, the wife lay resting with her son early in the morning. Half asleep, she felt something heavy leaning against her back, assumed it was her toddler, until he spoke up from the floor beside her, nowhere near her back at all, warning her not to turn around too quickly or the baby will fall. Startled fully awake, she scooped him up immediately. He calmly explained that the boy in the cap had been sitting right behind her while she slept, trying to get her to wake up and play. She left for her brother's house that same morning and told him everything. That night, back at the apartment with her husband, they both heard sounds from the dining room, water being poured into a glass, a chair scraping. No one else lived in the building. Investigating, they found a chair pulled out as if someone had just been sitting there, and a glass, one that hadn't been out earlier, sitting half full of water on the table. The next day, family members confronted the elderly security guard, pressing him about why such a nice flat in a good area had sold so cheap. Reluctantly, he explained, years earlier, that same building had housed a small religious school for children. One of the instructors had a violent temper, and after repeatedly losing patience with a slow-learning, parentless 7-year-old boy, beat him so severely the child died. The teacher fled immediately, and the school was shut down. When it reopened years later, students reported seeing a small boy crying in the corner of the prayer hall, or waking at night to find a child in a small cap asking for water. Enough students reported the same experiences that the school closed permanently, and the building was eventually converted into residential flats, which is how the couple ended up there. After hearing the full story, they sold the flat and moved elsewhere. This happened at a century-old religious boarding school, its buildings surrounded by ancient banyan trees. Senior students always warned newcomers, never walk the West Hostel corridor alone after 9 p.m. Most assumed it was just a hazing tradition, until one Thursday night changed that. Around 1 a.m., a student woke to the sound of slow footsteps in the corridor, stopping directly outside his door. 3 knocks followed. His roommate, already awake, hissed at him not to answer. A minute later, the knocking came again, louder, and then abruptly stopped. Peering through the window gap, he saw the corridor empty, except for one figure at the far end. White robes, cap, face tilted fully down. As he watched, it began moving toward them, without its feet ever touching the ground. Every light in the corridor cut out simultaneously, then flickered back on 5 seconds later. The figure was gone. The next morning, the head cleric grew visibly uneasy at the story and simply forbade anyone from entering that corridor after evening prayers, offering no explanation. Later that day, an elderly kitchen worker pulled the student aside privately and told him what almost no one else knew. Decades earlier, a student had vanished from that exact corridor. He was found 3 days later, alive, but permanently changed, staring blankly for hours, repeating only one phrase at night: "They still walk." They still walk. That night, determined to understand, the student and his roommate sat by their darkened window, watching the corridor. The footsteps returned, this time 4 separate sets, all in matching white robes and caps, faces obscured, as if wrapped in fog, moving in eerie unison. One stopped, slowly lifted its head, revealing a completely black face with unnaturally white eyes, and looked directly at their window. An invisible force struck the glass twice. Both boys dove for cover as an icy cold swept the room, and a chorus of overlapping voices demanded from outside, "Open the door!" When they finally worked up the courage to check afterward, the hallway was empty, but 4 sets of wet, muddy footprints led from the far end of the corridor directly to their door, with no trace of anyone walking back. The following night, the head cleric ordered everyone confined to their rooms after prayers, no exceptions. Around 1:20 a.m., the entire building lost power. From the direction of the mosque came the sound of someone reciting scripture beautifully. Impossible, since everyone should have been locked in their rooms. Through the window, a white-robed figure stood on the mosque veranda, mid-recitation, until it abruptly stopped, turned its faceless head directly toward their building, and raised a hand in their direction. Instantly, the footsteps returned, this time at least 10 sets moving together. They stopped directly outside the door, followed by a blow so hard the entire door shook. A voice, unmistakably the head cleric's, called from outside, "Don't open the door." Confused, since the real cleric's voice then answered from the opposite direction, "Don't open the door, I'm downstairs," leaving them to realize the first voice had been an imposter. A booming, inhuman laugh shook the entire building before everything went silent. At dawn, they found wet handprints across the corridor walls and muddy footprints leading straight to a long-sealed room at the corridor's western end, a room that had remained locked for over 30 years, ever since the original disappearance. The head cleric stared at that door for a long while before saying quietly, "I think they're trying to open that room again." No one ever learned what was inside, or what connection it held to the vanished student decades earlier. Shortly after, The school was closed for an extended period.